Welcome to another episode of the Hoopsfix Podcast with me, your host, Sam Nita, full-time British basketball advocate. And we're back again. It has been a little while, but once again, it is a very important podcast. Another legend of the game is hanging them up. None other than Dan Clark, GB captain and the men's all-time leading appearance leader. That doesn't make sense. All-time caps leader. All-time point scorer, all-time rebound leader. So when we're talking about legends, he is a legend. He was one of the first, the first British player to sign a junior contract in Europe when he signed in Spain with his Estudiantes. And now, 20 years later, is finally saying goodbye to playing professionally. He's got another opportunity on the horizon, working with a professional basketball club in the front office. Kind of vague about it, but I'm sure there'll be announcements soon, specifically what that is. But I thought it was time that we sort of come on the podcast. He's done a couple of appearances with us, but this time do a little bit more of a career retrospective, as well as discussing why he has decided to hang them up at this point. He signed in Manchester last year. It was a 2-year deal. And it was his first season in the BBL, and of course now is just coming off EuroBasket, a very tough EuroBasket performance, which of course we spoke about, and all the the troubles that GB has been going through, the difficulties they've had. So yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. And again, really sad. It's the end of an era, especially for the Great Britain programme. He's been an ever-present force on the squad, suiting up pretty much every single summer, as well as previous to his debut in 2009, representing the junior national teams as well. So when we talk about players that have given it all for their country, I think he is up amongst the top of them. So yeah, really enjoyable conversation, and yeah, excited to follow his career and see what is next. As always, before we get into the show, if you like what we're doing, if you want to support what we're doing, please check out our Patreon account. That is at patreon.com/hoopsfix, patreon.com/HOOPSFIX. There you can sign up to give us a monthly or annual contribution for as much or as little as you would like. It goes a long way in supporting the work that we're doing. This stuff is not free. It does cost money. And the more people that are watching these shows, that are consuming our content, that sign up to support, the more work and stuff that we can do in terms of trying to grow this British basketball thing. So yeah, check it out, patreon.com/hoopsfix. As always, let me know what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. If you're following on social media, drop us a comment at Hoopsfix. Or if you want some one-on-one interaction, you can always drop me an email, sam@hoopsfix.com. I reply to every single one. Anyway, that is enough from me. Here is this week's show. I say this week like it's weekly. It hasn't been weekly for a long time. But here is this latest episode of the Hoopsfix Podcast with me and GB captain Dan Clark. So we're here for a particular reason. You've obviously made the decision to hang them up and retire. Massive news, kind of the end of an era for British basketball a little bit. But I think that makes sense to start with. Kind of how have you come to that decision? Why have you made the decision to retire?
As you said, it's been a tough decision. I think I think it's one that not many people will be expecting. And yeah, a lot of thought, a lot of conversations going one way, going the other way, a lot of uncertainty really. But basically it's come down to that, I'm at peace with what I've done in my career. I'm happy with how it's gone. More than happy, I'm pretty proud of what I've done really. And yeah, and I think in life everything comes to an end, and I think it's important to be able to realise that. And, I'm lucky enough that other doors are starting to open, and I just feel like it's the right time for me personally, looking back over my career and, what's to come in the future basically. So yeah, I think it's the right decision. I'm obviously going to miss the game, well not miss the game, but miss playing, I think more than anything, the day-to-day grind as I normally call it, the times in the locker room with the teammates, the trips, just the day-to-day, lifestyle that I've come used to over all these years is going to drastically change. But, I think I'm in a good position, mentally, feel really good physically, which is again, was another plus point, I think, being able to walk away from the game on my own terms, and not because I've been forced to, or the injuries have kind of held me down or held me back. I feel, I've had my injury problems over the years, but I do feel really good at the moment. So yeah, I'm, really at peace with the decision I made, and I think I'm making it for the right reasons.
Coming into the season just gone, did you have any sort of idea, inkling in your head that this could be the last one?
Well, I mean, when I came back to the BBL, it was to kind of start off a transitioning period. I had no idea how long that period would be. It was very much, how I felt, season on season, really. And then on what else was going on around personally and, professionally in other areas of my life, really. But yeah, I wasn't hiding anything when I came back to the BBL. It was part of a transitioning period. I started doing a master's, thinking about life after professional sport kind of thing, and yeah, obviously played the year. I really enjoyed it, which was also a good thing to have as my last year. I really enjoyed playing back in the UK and playing in front of people that I'd never really played in front of, apart from the national team here and there. So yeah, it was a good experience, and one that I deeply treasure and I'm proud, and again very proud of. But yeah, I think I could play another year, but I think the time's right, basically.
What is your master's in?
My master's is in sport and business management and politics. Politics being the very important one in British basketball, obviously. But,
And so when you look to kind of what you are transitioning into, have you got any idea of kind of what the next step is for you?
Yeah, I've made it very clear over the last few years, and especially, thinking and, in my downtime, that coaching is not for me. I'm from a basketball family. Dad's a coach, obviously. Mum's been involved. Ella's obviously involved. So I've had exposure to all levels of the game, and I just don't feel like coaching is something that I would enjoy or get the most out of. But there are other areas connected to basketball, more behind the scenes, that allow me to still have that competitive edge, but at the same time, they give me another insight and look on the way basketball's run and produced basically on the court. So
what is it that you're potentially going to be doing?
So I'm looking to move into like a type of general manager, basketball orientated role in the UK. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to discuss in any more detail at the moment. But basically I'll be moving into a role, as I said, that allows me to carry on very much linked to basketball, very much linked to sport, and something that I'm extremely excited about, really.
So did you, when you were making the decision whether or not to retire, was this offer potentially on the table already? Like, did it help kind of make that decision because you knew you potentially had something to go into?
Yeah, definitely. And it's pretty obvious that, jobs like this, especially in basketball and especially in the UK, there aren't many of. Being able to move into almost like a general manager role. How many professional teams are in the league now? 10, 11 teams. There's one national team, so that's like 11 roles. And in Europe it's the same. There's one per team. It's not like you're a player and there's 12, 14 spots up per team. There's one per team, and a lot of the time, it is very much, if you played at that club, if you've done anything with that club, and do you know that club? So yeah, I'm extremely grateful, extremely, pleased that something's, appeared at this moment in time. There were other options, that I could have moved into, but I think this is the right one for me, and it's a perfect transitioning role, really, moving out of basketball and into an area that I really think I can help and move the program forward, really.
So if you stopped working out and everything, like playing, like kind of, when did you stop doing all of that and make that decision?
So to be honest with you, since EuroBasket, the idea of moving away from the playing side of the game has been very much on my mind. And as people, we subconsciously send ourselves messages I didn't really realise until I started really becoming, and since EuroBasket I haven't really worked out, and I haven't kind of thought about working out. So that was another, again, I think it's just my body, my mind showing me that now was, the right time. And so, yeah, I mean, I believe that, and hopefully, the future will show me that it was the right time.
You mentioned EuroBasket there. It's, let's not sugarcoat it. It was a brutal campaign. Do you think that actually helped push you make that decision of just like, do you know what, like this is just the national team stuff is getting pretty tiring. As I said before we started recording, these conversations around the federation, the failures of the federation, is something that we've been having for years. And here we are, and it's kind of happened on a bigger stage. I really felt for the players watching it, kind of seeing the interviews, in the mix zones afterwards, in the press conferences, and rather than talking about the basketball, we're talking about the sort of the off-court stuff again. How difficult was EuroBasket for you personally?
It's still a bit hard to talk about, really, because the emotions are still so raw. As you said, it was an extremely difficult time. As a group, as individuals, both from players and staff that were surrounded by a team. I would say in my career that probably spans 20 years now, that was 3 of the hardest weeks I've had. The problem being that it was only 3 weeks, and it wasn't longer. So I do think if it was longer, then the experience would have been different. But yeah, it wasn't. The thing that most hit me or hit home hardest while we were away was that we weren't even angry, we weren't, annoyed, or we wanted to throw our toys out of our pram or whatnot. We were just sad about the whole situation, in the fact that we felt, deserted, alone, kind of just pushed out into like such a world stage. Just to get our asses handed to us, basically, because, as any player will know, you can work out and you can run up and down and you can lift as much as you want and scrimmage as much as you want, but till you get into a proper game, there's nothing like that, and that lack of prep was just, really hard to accept. You can, as a professional athlete, you can try and trick your mind to believing that everything's okay, that that we can do it, that we can make up the difference just through our togetherness and our belief in each other. Which if there's one thing that team has is belief in one another and togetherness. And I think one of the main reasons we were there at EuroBasket was because of that. We fully believe in everybody on that team, in the coaching staff, in the staff that supports us. And that belief almost made reality a bit more harder to accept, because when reality hit, it was tough to accept and it was tough to deal with. So yeah, as I said, it was a tough time. It's quite possibly rock bottom. Did it help in making a decision in terms of retirement? Possibly, but I think it's kind of a double-edged sword on that one, because I didn't really want to end the playing career on a negative note like that, but at the same time, it did help, and it was maybe the straw that broke the camel's back, really, in terms of what we're willing to put up with, and and what we want to happen in the future.
As I talk to you now, you're someone that's clearly, very passionate about British basketball and the off-court stuff. You've sort of been at the forefront of speaking out on behalf of the players over the last however many years. Now you're talking about potentially going into some type of front office role with a team. You're obviously studying politics, management, sports management, all this kind of stuff. I'm there like, well, it makes sense here for you to get involved with the federation in some type of capacity to help them sort out some of this mess, Kind of, has that crossed your mind since coming back from EuroBasket? Have there been conversations? We know they've just announced the new chair, Chris Grant, last week. So kind of like, what do you see moving forward? Do you see yourself being involved in any type of formal capacity with the federation?
Look, I'm, to a point where I may be blinded by the fact, but I'm British basketball's #1 fan, I think. I love British basketball. I love the people involved in it. The people like yourself, the people who are involved, the people we don't know about, the guys that are running the local league teams, the guys, and I fully believe, 100% believe that British basketball will work at some point. I'm not in a position to be able to tell you when that moment will be, but it's just too big a sport in too big a nation, that the game won't work. you know, and I don't think it's a thing about the game catching on, because I do think there's obviously loads of kids playing it. There's loads of adults playing it. There's, you know, we've got a professional league. We've got, you know, we have the infrastructure. I just do think it's just a case of, you know, getting the people who know and understand and have seen it happen on other, you know, on other levels, on other elite levels of how basketball works, and just allow them to share that knowledge and move the game forward, basically. Because at the moment, one of the problems, I think, is the people involved, you know, and I do think, obviously, I know we need to have a certain level of, you know, political ability, commercial ability and things like that, but, you know, the way the game works is very different to the way other sports work in the UK. It's, you know, it's almost, you know, the polar opposite to a lot of the more successful sports we have. And therefore, every time I hear basketball being compared to, I don't know, any sport, any other Olympic sport, it's like, well, yeah, that's great for them and I'm really happy for them, but that's not basketball, and basketball's right over there somewhere, you know, in terms of firstly, its capabilities, I think, and secondly, just, you know, its social aspect, its community aspect, its professional aspect. You know, there's not many sports in the UK outside of football that, you know, are as worldwide and as popular they are as worldwide as basketball. You know, and although I do think people realise this, it's not, you know, nothing's really changing. I don't know, over my tenure as a GB senior men's player, I've probably had, 6, 7 chairmen. Can't tell you how many board members, you know, and it just, you know, at some point, we've got to do something different, something that other sports don't do, involve people that other sports don't do. But as I said before, you know, I want basketball to work. I will do anything I can to help basketball work.
So could you see yourself being involved at a federation level?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, definitely could, and would be open to the chance if the situation was right. You know, I think, you know, we've heard other players speak out about it. You know, I just do think players need to have a bigger voice. You know, players need to be heard. Ex-players need to be heard. People who have coached internationally need to be heard. You know, people who have run teams internationally need to be heard. Because we can talk about the British Basketball Federation all day and what it's responsible for and what it's not, but, you know, if the national teams are working, it makes everyone's job a lot easier, I think. You know, in terms of, you know, from the BBL clubs to the NBL clubs to the grassroots situation, if we've got something to aspire to and look up to and something that we're proud of as a nation, because at the moment I don't think anyone in the basketball community is proud of what we're producing in terms of teams on the floor and what they're doing. You know, I think once we've got that, then, you know, we can definitely move forward in a positive direction. Because I do think, you know, if the game moves forward, we have to move forward as one, and that's the whole basketball community, not just, you know, a board or a home nation. It has to be everybody, I think.
Yeah, no, I've always wondered whether or not, you know, when it comes to developing basketball, whether or not the most important thing is you have a massive base and the participation levels are huge and you focus on the grassroots first, or whether actually you focus on the sort of the elite, the national teams, to have that sort of aspirational platform, which will then, you know, develop the grassroots, because they have something that they're looking to do. And I've never been sure, but over recent years, I feel like I'm more leaning towards focusing on the elite because of the importance of having that platform to aspire to. You know, the reason people play basketball is because they want to play in the NBA or whatever and be an NBA superstar. Like,
but if you go around now and you ask 100 kids that play basketball, you know, whether on their junior teams or whatever it's called, NBL Premier Leagues or whatever they're called around the UK, and you ask them what they aspire to be, you get one, maybe two that will say, I want to play in the BBL or I want to play for GB. You know, they're all thinking about, I want to go to college in the States, or I want to, you know, like you said, I want to be an NBA player. You know, I think we have to really reinforce how important playing for your national team is. I think we've lost, you know, a bit of focus on that point. How beneficial it could be for you as a player, but also, you know, why aren't we getting kids from London aspiring to play for the London Lions? Why aren't we getting kids from Manchester to play for aspire or have that one focus of playing for the Manchester Giants and representing their hometown. That's the point I think we need to get to. And again, as I said, it will make the game better and make the leagues better and hopefully make the national teams better. So
now you've done a year in the BBL. Kind of, what is your analysis? Like, I know I've spoken to you many years ago about whether or not it's something you'd ever do, and even at that time you were very open about the fact. You said, I would love to play in the BBL. I'd love to play domestically. I'd love to be able to play in front of my family, my friends, play at home. And like many other players have said, well, the money's not there, the level of competition's not there, the infrastructure's not there, so it just was not an appealing proposition at that time. Now you've obviously done it. I guess the first question is, how was the reality compared to the expectations coming in? Like, did you have a sort of a picture of what you think it would be like and then what it actually was like? And then two, I guess, an analysis of like the thing as a whole, like kind of what have you been your sort of takeaways of where the league is at, after playing a sort of full season in it?
So as I said at the beginning of the podcast, I've really, really enjoyed my time playing back in the UK. And as I said to you many years ago, I would have loved to play back in the UK many years ago, but as the infrastructure and the money and the support wasn't there. But yeah, I think coming back to the UK was, based on my experience, I think, abroad, playing in a number of, historically huge basketball countries. And it was almost jealousy, I think, looking at all these domestic players, playing in front of their mum, their dad, their aunt, their little cousin would come and watch them play, their son and their daughter, running around. They'd go on Sunday to have Sunday lunch at their parents' house and stuff like that. Just little things, it was that little thing. I think, how good would it be to be able to play back in the UK? Just be close to family, get to play in front of them, get your nan down, to come and watch you play. Just little things like that, that as a basketball player, a professional basketball player, and a British basketball player that, we kind of take for granted because we've never really had that opportunity to do it. But, as you get older and you start to, give importance to more things, it became more and more important that, it'd be like, when you take the money situation out of the, if you just look at the values that you are as a person, it'd be amazing to play in front of my family and stuff like that. It's stuff like that I was almost jealous of, and that was, also started the thought process about coming back to the BBL. And kind of moving on, it was, I was obviously aware of some of the players, of some of the level, and the main thing I realised very quick was that the talent level is there. In terms of players, I do think there needs to be huge steps in terms of coaching, and the coaching these players are receiving, and the way teams play. If that league or if the BBL has aspirations to to put teams in Europe and be successful in Europe, that's an area that definitely needs some focusing on. But yeah, the talent level is definitely there. I'd say the basketball IQ isn't quite there. It's more, how will I describe it? It is much more of an NBA style league in terms of lots of one-on-one, lots of individual. You'll see guys go off for 30 points. You go, and 15 assists, 16 assists, and stuff like that, and stuff that you don't really see that stuff a lot in Europe. So that was kind of an eye opener to me, and saying like, well, how are these guys doing it? But if you see the style of the game and the way it's played, it is more like that, and it is a game that allows you to put up, big numbers if you have the capabilities to. And I think there are a lot of guys in the league who have capabilities to put up big numbers and do big things. It's just, I think their basketball education hasn't necessarily been at the same level as some similar level guys in Europe, and therefore when they do come up against those guys, they will struggle. But again, I just do think it is a question of learning more than teaching, really. Giving those guys the exposure and the ability to see what it is really like and go up against those guys. And I think that will take the league up another step and improve. But it is, the league's obviously in a big transitioning period at the moment with 777 coming in, which I think is very exciting. I think they are very excited about the prospects for the game in Britain, which is also encouraging and exciting that like such a big company like them is can see the value that a lot of people in the UK can't, and I just do think that, they're obviously coming across a lot of things that, they may find difficult. But yeah, I just do think I'm trying to work out the best way to say this, but it's almost like everyone's happy with their little piece of pie, basically, instead of thinking about the bigger picture in the BBL. I think if everyone starts to kind of work together and realise how big it can be, I think everyone's bit of pie will become a lot bigger, and everyone will be a lot more successful and valued in a different light, I think. So that's the only thing I'd really say about, the kind of the infrastructure and the way things are run, really.
How much did, of course, you were coached by Lloyd Gardner, who's you've known for many, many years. Like, how much did that play a role in you being able to come back?
Yeah, it was huge, really. It was huge because, the people that know me and the people that, have worked with me, as a basketball player, I think a lot. My basketball IQ, I consider my basketball IQ to be very high. And therefore, me working with someone that I didn't think was not on my level, but able to understand or relate to where I've played and the experiences I've had, and understand that I wouldn't accept certain things in terms of standards was important to me, because if not, it would have just been a very negative situation, I think. And although, as Lloyd would admit, he had to manage me in a lot of situations in terms of my expectations and the way I thought things should have been done and whatnot. It was, I really enjoyed working with him. As you said, we've known each other for years, but being able to work with him on that stage and at that level was great, and I really, really, really enjoyed it, basically.
What would be your assessment of the season, of the Manchester Giants season?
You've got to put it in perspective, I think. I think it was great from the point of view that the team had come from such a bad position in terms of over the last few years. Callum Jones was on the team last year, and we had a number of conversations going up and down the M1 about things that happened in the past at the Giants. And it was great also to see a team or a club invest in a really, like, a proper British core, not a British core that's just making up the numbers, but a British core that had an extremely important role on the team, and really was the heart and soul of that team, and again, going back to the way, my experience and the way things have happened in Europe, that's how the most successful teams are built. They are built around a very strong, national team or domestic core that then you can add pieces to, instead of doing it the way the BBL seems to be built, which is bringing, your important pieces as exports and then try and fill the gaps with British guys. I think it should almost be the other way around, because that, obviously things in Manchester have gone a bit sideways, backwards, however you want to call it. But I do think the idea behind it of really giving importance to the British player was refreshing, and at the same time proved that it can work. But as the season, I'd say it was a successful season considering where we came from. We had a really good time. I think we enjoyed it on the court, which is always important. From looking from the inside out kind of thing. Maybe from the outside in, the fans may have expected a lot more. I don't know. But we made a cup final. Obviously something that hadn't been done in Manchester for, I don't know, since Nick Nurse was there, probably. I don't know, in the early 2000s or late 90s. We would have liked it to finish in a different way. Obviously we lost in the playoffs and things like that. But it's basketball, it's sport, and it's almost more about for us as players and coaches, more about the journey that we went on together than the actual end result. Because obviously everyone wants to win, and everyone thinks they can win, but it's not always reality, and it's just the way it was, really.
You mentioned it there. I wasn't sure whether to bring it out, but obviously things have gone a little bit sideways in Manchester since the end of the season. We've kind of, obviously Lloyd's left and he's down in Surrey now. A bunch of players left. Obviously Jamel's in Cheshire. And there's been this kind of, obviously Vince has now been brought in. He's kind of been announced as sort of a GM slash coach, and there's questions about whether or not he's involved in ownership, and kind of there's been all this weirdness with the league not announcing signings, but the team announcing signings because they're doing due diligence around sort of this new ownership stuff that's going on. Obviously, what's your understanding? How much can you tell us about kind of like what has been going on and what the situation is in Manchester?
Well, I don't really know what I can tell you, because I don't know if I have much more information than anyone else, really, unfortunately.
Right.
Which is another annoying or frustrating way to end it. I just do think.
Because also you were on a multi-year deal originally, right?
Yeah. So I was on a 2-year deal, and really that was the aim, was to play 2 years there and see how it goes from there, really. But yeah, it really went backwards towards the end of the season and sideways and tits up, however you want to phrase it, kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to be able to tell you more. I'd love to know more about the ins and outs of what's actually gone on and what hasn't gone on and what is actually going on at this moment in time. So yeah, I mean, I think,
But have you had conversations with them about what's going on this year? Like, are they expecting you back? Like, obviously the season started and you're not on the roster. Like, kind of, there must have been some level of dialogue.
I got a call, I think, mid-June, I think it was, when everything started kicking off about takeovers and whatnot. But after that, very, very limited. I'm still in Madrid at the moment. Came back after EuroBasket and have no one talked to me about potentially, even though I was going through all these thought processes about stopping playing and not stopping playing, there was never really no dialogue about me potentially going to Manchester or getting a flight over to Manchester or anything like that. So it was all very, very weird, uncomfortable situation.
But you are still you're technically a contracted player, but they haven't been in touch with you. And there's been no actual clear, okay, you're not coming in for this season, you're retiring. Like, there's been nothing.
No.
I don't.
Obviously, they're aware now that I'm retiring, but up until then, there was
nothing. You told them rather than them being like, oh, are you going to let us know what you're doing this season?
Yeah, it was more that. Which I was not very happy with, but I understand that it's a difficult time up there, but again, I just don't think it's the way things should be done. So yeah, I mean, as I said, I was going to say before, like, along with London obviously being the capital city and everything, but I think Manchester has an extremely important role to play in the BBL. The fact that there was rumours of a team not being there this year, I think, is something that as a league shouldn't be contemplated, because I just think it's such an important city. I mean, I love living there. They live and breathe sport up there. They always have two huge football teams, but there's so many other sports that go on, alongside football and alongside basketball. It's just a wonderful place to be, and a wonderful place to play sport in, really. So the fact that there was possibilities of a team not playing out of there is just ludicrous, really, from my point of view.
What do you? I mean, you may not even know, but like, obviously, if a team's on potentially withdrawing, is clearly having financial issues on some level, right? So, like, where are the financial issues coming from? Like, is it an inability to sort of raise commercial revenue? Is it a lack of fans coming to games? Like, do you have any kind of knowledge of that stuff from a behind the scenes perspective?
Not in the BBL, no. I wouldn't say I have enough knowledge to be able to comment on it. But I do think it's obvious, like the facilities we're playing in. I think building a team around selling tickets in the considering the size of our facilities is a no-goer, basically. I think that what the situations that Leicester and Newcastle have at the moment should be the minimum for what the BBL should have. I think every team should, at a minimum level, should have what Leicester and Newcastle have, and I think what Leicester and Newcastle have done is great, and it's they're definitely leading the way in terms of developing a club in the UK. They shouldn't be the standard setters. They should be where every team should be at the moment, I think, and that's where the league's got a rank to get everyone to, I think. But yeah, I don't have enough knowledge or anything like that in terms of the financial. There was, as you said, there's obviously financial difficulties, but I don't really know the ins and outs of why not. You still see the Giants even in the beginning of this season still playing with no sponsorship on their shirt or anything like that. I don't know if that's got anything to do with it. I don't know what the relationship with the city council up in Manchester is. So yeah, I mean,
it's crazy. There was a lot of ambitions, right? Like when you first went there was kind of this vision of what it wants to be, and I know there was announcements around sort of doing citywide community initiatives and really trying to get everyone behind the club, and there was a lot of ambition there. But again, I think it's proof of, well, it's either one, proof of how difficult it is, how difficult the British basketball market is to make something work, which I definitely agree with on some level, or two, on some level not having the right people involved to be able to bring that vision to life, because you, as we were discussing in the start of this conversation, that you need a mix of, there has to be some basketball people because it's a basketball team, of course, but you need people that have knowledge of the sort of the off-court roles, the commercial side of things, selling tickets, merchandise, sponsorship, game day experience, like all of these things that kind of, I guess, make a professional team. Could you ever see yourself getting involved in on the ownership side, like owning a BBL franchise?
It was a conversation that came up, with a few of the GB guys this summer, actually, on these trips that we have across Europe and bus rides and stuff like that. It did pop up a couple of times. How much of a reality it is, I don't know. We haven't even got to the stage of looking at how much, it potentially costs. Not to set up a team, but to run it in what we consider the right way. We don't really know. We know generally, or we know rough figures, but we haven't really looked into it properly yet. It's an appealing thought. Is it a reality? I don't know, but yeah, I think.
So a consortium of GB players as an ownership group, consortium of GB players sort of running a BBL franchise could be something that we see down the line, right?
That would be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? That'd be something new, I think, that's never been done before.
Well, when you say we've got an idea of how, or we want to run things, how things should be run, like clearly, you're alluding to things that kind of in your experiences within the BBL, there are certain things that are not being done that from your, experiences in Spain and in other countries are, I guess, minimum operating standards. Kind of what are those things, like for people that don't know, like kind of where are we missing a trick with regards to sort of player welfare, player experience when it comes to the BBL?
One of the big things that stood out to me from the start in the BBL was these back-to-back weekends. I think the stat, that automatically right from the jump, lowers the standard of play, just because. Although we are basketball players and people consider us, maybe different, or obviously there's a lot of gifted athletes and gifted, sportsmen there, but it's very, very hard to play at your maximum level on back-to-back days or on one day off. Your body does need a certain amount of recovery. And I understand there's all types of contracts and whatnot about the amount of games that need to be played within the league and stuff like that, but at the same time, that really stood out to me as something I really struggled with at the beginning of the year. Because I just never been. Obviously I played in tournaments and things like that where you are required to play on back-to-back games, but then during the whole year, it does become extremely tiring, and obviously increases the injury, the possibilities of injury and things like that. Which kind of moves me on to the next point, is like the support staff that are surrounded by teams and stuff like that. The access players have to physios or doctors, or to be able to get a scan if something goes wrong, stuff like that. From talking to other players, and it's not easy. There's only a few clubs that I think have physios at every practice and game and things like that, and it's just coming from teams where it's unthinkable not even to have two physios and a doctor at practice. To come into places where there's no one. It's just 10 guys and a coach. It's I'm not saying it has to be like it, but it is in other places, but I do think there is a common ground where that's just sensible, really, and as you said, improves player welfare and players' experiences of what they're getting on and off the court.
I'm going to throw this out there because we've had these discussions about a players' association, right? Mm-hmm. I know that kind of we're trying to get some stuff rolling, get something off the ground to bring players together and give a voice for players. Like, how important do you think the formation of a players association is, and what kind of role do you see that having?
Yeah, as you said, especially I've thought about this for a number of years, but especially after having played in the BBL for a year, it's needed. There's not a doubt whether we should do it or shouldn't. It's just needed. Players need a united voice, They need to be heard. They need to, the powers that be, whether it be the BBL, the BBF, the home nations, they need to be aware of how valuable and how players can be used as a tool, as a communicating tool, and all these things. But for all this to happen, I do think there has to be a united voice, and the players need to be represented in the right way and at the right times. There's lots of conversations go on, and in boardrooms and in meetings, and there's not even the thought of introducing the player aspect or a player's point of view. And I just do think it's extremely important, and it will be extremely valuable, and and I think eye-opening to a lot of people of how intelligent and how thoughtful and how much they can bring, not just as basketball players, but as people to situations around British basketball. So yeah, I mean, it's needed, both for men and for women, and I do think it will be another positive step, for the game in this country.
100%. Switching gears a little bit, I said to you beforehand, one of the things I really... Go on.
My computer's about to turn off.
Okay. Go grab your charger. Can you still hear me as you walk around?
Yeah, I can still hear you, yeah.
Okay, I'll keep talking, then I don't have to cut this bit out. Switching gears, one of the things I wanted to speak about, and I think it'd be really interesting for people to hear about, because we never got to this on the original episode that we recorded, which is episode 15, if people are interested in going back, was your kind of early years. You were one of the first, if not the first sort of junior player from England to sign a contract in Europe as a 14-year-old in Spain. And I would love to hear kind of that, what your memories are of that, like kind of making that decision, kind of how it came about, and then why that ended up being the path that you obviously stuck on, as opposed to taking what is the more standard route with UK athletes, which is sort of going to American high school and college.
It's funny you say that, because I met last week. I'm still in contact with him, and he's been involved even in British basketball, which is Alberto Lorenzo. I met him last week for lunch as kind of a celebration, because it was 20 years to the day that I moved to Spain, kind of thing. Unlike a lot of people in the UK, I was lucky in the fact that I was from a basketball family, and a basketball family that had international experience, both playing and coaching, and therefore kind of knew a bit more about basketball, outside of the UK and outside of the NBA, if that makes sense. Because I can remember back when I was young, watching, waking up at 3-4 in the morning and turning Channel 4 and then watching the NBA Finals, and that was kind of my first experience with basketball, outside of what I had with my family and stuff. But that the aspect of European basketball would never really crossed my mind, until I went to, just out of the blue, a friend of my dad's talked to him about a basketball camp that was going on in Spain, in the south of Spain, and that he was sending his kids on it, and did I want to go, kind of thing. It was like a week residential camp in the mountains in the south of Spain. I think everyone in the UK at that point had been to Spain on holiday, but I had no idea really where I was going, what I was going to do. I knew I could play basketball. I knew I was pretty good at it by that time. I played National League, started to play for national teams and stuff like that. But the whole concept of going to Europe or going to Spain, that I had no idea they played basketball there, and going to a basketball camp was kind of eye-opening. And you get there, and they kind of separate you into teams by age, and all of a sudden, I'm just going off, and that's, what was I, 12 or 13, or probably about 6'4", 6'5" at the time, bringing the ball up the court, shooting the ball, going for the basket, things like that. And all of a sudden, my parents called me that evening and said that they've had about 5 calls with this club in Spain that they want to bring me over on a scholarship kind of situation. So obviously that developed. By the way, the team was called Estudiantes, which at the time was, one of the powerhouses of European basketball. They'd made EuroLeague Final Fours. They were in the Spanish League Finals. Coincidentally, there was like a lockout around the time I was talking to them, and there was their main sponsor was like really trying to bring Jordan over to play.
Really?
I can remember seeing it on the front page of the paper over there. Like, no idea what it said. Just said Jordan and Estudiantes next to it. So it was, it was just a bit surreal. But yeah, anyway, going back to the point, it was. So yeah, we were after the camp, we were in constant conversation. That also, I think, opened, obviously as a 12, 13-year-old, I depended a lot on my parents. I think that opened, the fact that they were interested opened a lot of doors into other opportunities around Europe, whether it be in Germany or other teams in Spain. And we did go on a few visits to different places, kind of recruitment trips, if that's what you want to call it, but at 13 years old.
So where did you go?
We went to Germany and to a couple of other teams in Spain. But I was, after my first visit to Estudiantes, I was sold on it. To give you a bit of context, like Estudiantes is a team that's kind of developed out of a high school back in the 1930s, 40s, and has gradually moved up and became bigger and bigger, and and now has one of like the biggest fan bases in Spain. It's got one of the biggest youth sections in Europe. We're talking about youth sections with over 1,000 players on it and things like that. So it's just the whole. I can just remember the first time we arrived there. Just walking around, it was just eye-opening. I've never seen so many kids, so many people, so many parents, all just there for basketball. Outdoor courts, indoor courts, 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 11 o'clock at night, just completely jam-packed of team practices, individual practices. Kids running around the block as, S&C trainings going on and stuff like that. It was just, I was sold on it. And the fact that it had grown out of such a small situation meant that the feeling around the club was just, one of a kind. And something that I think a lot of clubs have tried to imitate, but obviously it's very hard. The main gym where I ended up practicing with the first team, there's a lot of times that we would have to wait for the under 6s to get off the court to be able to practice. Because like a lot of the American guys that came over didn't really understand it, and were like, well, why can't we go on the court? We're the pro team. We're the reason everyone else is here, and it's like almost a bit different to a lot of other pro teams where it's not, as in like this is a club that's been built from the bottom upwards, and they give the same amount of importance to a 5, 6-year-old as they do to the pro team in terms of court availability and things like that. So yeah, it was interesting. Obviously decided to move there. Started playing with what would be the equivalent of like the under 16 team, and just moved up. And within 2 or 3 years, I was practicing and playing with the pro team, which again, until I got over there and realised how big basketball was, it was. I was thinking, oh yeah, I can play professional basketball. I can do this. I can do that. But until you actually realise what is needed and what you need to do to get there, it's eye-opening. But the fact that I did it and I was able to do it was, extremely proud moment. And I've still got my shirt hanging up at home from my professional debut. It is a very important moment, and yeah.
How old were you? How old were you when you made your pro debut?
17.
17.
Yeah, I was still. I remember because I remember going to school in the morning and then going straight to the game in the afternoon. So yeah, I was still at school at the time, so it was interesting. What
and how like the obviously say how much or as little as you want to say, but with regards to like how a junior contract works, for you to sign as a 14-year-old, you're signing with a professional team, but obviously it's kind of you're still that age, and so you're not a professional in that sense, but there is still a contract involved, right? Like, kind of, how does it work?
As I said before when we started talking about this, that obviously at 13, 14, 15, no one's in any place to sign any type of contract on their own. So I did depend a lot on on my parents, and obviously they took the lead on things like that. I obviously had an agent at that time. I was recruited by an agent. Well, I originally had a football agent, because obviously coming from the UK and without the knowledge that we now have, we had no idea about any type of contractual agreements or anything like that. So my original kind of first exposure to any type of agency was a football agent who was really good, really helped me with the contract. But then I was recruited by a basketball agent, and it made things quite a lot easier. But yeah, I mean, you say I wasn't a professional at the age of 14, but looking back on it now, I was. The level of what they expected of me at that age, in terms of commitment and improvement, and reaching targets. Looking back at it, although I was having the time of my life, as you can imagine, living on my own. Well, not living on my own, but living in the halls of residence and whatnot. But with guys my age, stuff like that, and playing basketball. It was not by no means a chore, and basketball's never really been what I consider a job or a chore or something that I have to do. It's something that I've loved doing, and I think that was something I also learned when I was there. It was just if you don't love it, you're not going to be good at it, basically.
What was it they were expecting of you? What was your schedule looking like as a 14-year-old?
So I'd leave in the morning to go to school with about 3 backpacks. I'd get on the bus, go to school, finish school around 3:30. So it was a similar day, but then I'd go straight to the gym, and I'd have S&C workouts, individual technical workout, and then depending on the evening, I'd either have 1 or 2 team practices. So if I was playing, say, when I was a junior, I was like first year junior, under 18s, I'd probably practice with the under 18s, but then I'd also probably practice with the second team, which was also obviously great for my development. But it was, I'd get home at, I don't know, 10:30 at night, have something to eat, do any homework I had to do, because that was the only thing my mum never let up on, was making sure that I did well at school, as any mum does. So yeah, it was tiring. I remember we used to just have 1 day a week off, like one afternoon a week off, which was, just recovery time kind of thing, just get home from school and crash, basically. So yeah, it was tough, but you just got used to it. It was just the way it was. There was no moaning. Everyone was doing the same thing, putting in the same amount of commitment. So yeah.
So at what point did you start getting paid to play basketball?
So we were careful with this one, because I'm not sure what the rules are now with the NCAA and things like that, but there was still, we still wanted to leave open the option of me going to college in the States. Even though I'd gone down this European path for my development and whatnot, we still wanted to leave that opportunity open, which was open. It was a possibility. I was recruited, by Division 1 schools and stuff like that, and obviously, I got to play in like the Nike Hoop Summit against guys, which gave me also in the States. Playing it in the States gave me a lot of exposure to Division 1 schools and whatnot. So it was a decision. I'd say throughout my career, I probably made 2 important decisions, and they were both before the age of 18, which was one going to Spain, and then one deciding to stay in Spain. Which was based on a lot of reasons. Obviously, I had an agent at the time who was very much in the know about both sides of the story in terms of the NCAA and staying and playing professionally in Europe. So yeah, I mean, it was very interesting looking back on it, and the things we said, and looking back in hindsight of the way things have turned out, and the way things have worked. But yeah, it was definitely. I don't regret any decision I've ever made. Basically, is the way I'd put it. I thought they've always been made for the right reason, and for me, for the greater good, really, in terms of my professional career and me as a person.
So just on the college piece, so you were recruited by a number of Division One schools. Like, who was recruiting you? Did you go on actual any official visits? Like, I assume this was when you basically finished your high school career. What's your high school career in Spain? So when you were 18, you were then had to then make that decision whether you sign a contract, a professional. I assume a professional contract in Spain, or you then go to the US college route.
Yeah, it wasn't so much sign the professional contract. It was more activate the contract I had, if that makes sense. So everything was already set out in terms of, but we just wanted to make sure that we weren't reaching NCAA rules kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it came down to the fact that the main school I wanted to go to and they wanted me to go to was Syracuse. And I had been there again on a basketball camp. They'd taken me around and I'd seen the university and I loved it. It was just, a different world, from what we're used to seeing in the UK in terms of universities and stuff like that. The campus was just like a city. I don't know if anyone listening here has seen the Syracuse games or been to the Carrier Dome, but the Carrier Dome is ridiculous in where they play. I think it's got like 80,000 seats. Obviously, you can't. It's made for indoor American football, I think, or athletics or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, they've got people like 30,000, 40,000 fans going to the games and stuff like that. And you see other players at the time when I walk around campus, and they're like superstars. So I mean, who wouldn't be attracted to that? And the fact that. I remember talking to one guy when I was at the Hoop Summit who'd committed to Syracuse, and he was saying that, oh yeah, you should definitely come, we'll be really good, this, that and the other. But yeah, I mean, I decided not to. I think it was the right decision.
But what factored into that decision? How did you like to be an 18-year-old and turn that down is tough,
Yeah, it was tough. And as I said, it was an important decision. It was a hard decision. But it just came down to, and again, I'm lucky because I'm from or part of a basketball family, and that just doesn't mean my close family. That means people that I'm associated with, people I know who really know basketball. They really, really know basketball, and they know. And we came to the conclusion that for my development as a basketball player, I was going to get more out of playing professionally in Europe, basically. I'm playing at 17. I'm playing against professionals who have already done that for those 4 years at college in the States. They've already gone through that process, and now they're professional. And these are the ones that have been churned out the other end, who are considered good enough to be professional. And I'm going up against them on a daily basis. And these are the best players that have played in college basketball. Obviously, apart from the ones that have gone to the NBA, but these are the best guys. And I'm putting myself up against that every day. I thought was a lot more valuable and a lot better for my development than going to school in the States. And there's also that aspect of European basketball for me at the time. Obviously, the game's changed a lot since then. We believed it was better for me, my development as a player. As you know, like I'm a stretch skilled four-man, which at the time in the States didn't really exist. We had the feeling, and from conversations with coaches at the university, that my role would have been, anyone that knows Syracuse, their 2-3 zone, and just stand in the middle of the zone and play close to the basket, and I'm not sure, well, I am sure that's not where I wanted to be as a basketball player. That's not what I wanted to do as a basketball player. Looking back at hindsight, if I had gone to Syracuse, would I have gone to the NBA? Possibly. May have had more possibilities of going to the NBA if I was at Syracuse, possibly. Would I have become as good a basketball player? I doubt it. So yeah, hindsight, everything's easy. But, as I said before, I'm happy with every decision I've ever made and would make it again, really.
Did you feel like the NBA was in reach at any point? I remember, obviously, you did a stint in the NBA Summer League, didn't you, with Brooklyn in like 2014, I think. But kind of, have you had other conversations outside of that? Like, how close did it feel?
Yeah, I think it was a reality. It was a possibility. It wasn't just, I hear a lot of other guys, British guys, international guys saying, "Oh yeah, I would. If this hadn't happened, I'd have gone to the NBA and stuff like that." But The NBA is a big enough organisation and with enough scouts and enough infrastructure that if you're good enough, they'll find you, basically. If they think you're good enough. Yeah, and there's always, right time, right place kind of situations. But at the end of the day, if you're good enough and they think that they can help you, they'll find you, they'll come and get you, and it's the NBA. So if they come and find you and they want you, you're going. And it's not like, no, I think I'll stay in Europe. No, you're going to the NBA, mate. Like, there's no two things about it. It's the NBA. It's everyone's dream. It's where everyone wants to get to. And you're telling me you'd rather play in a gym in the middle of Greece on the 5th of December or play against LeBron James. I mean, there's no doubt in that. So, but yeah, I mean, it was a possibility. I wouldn't say I was the elite of the elite in terms of talent, in terms of, a definite 100% lottery pick. But yeah, if certain circumstances has changed and certain things have happened throughout my career, in terms of injuries and that, yeah, it was definitely a possibility.
One of the things that actually surprised me last season with you in Manchester, obviously we did a top 10 plays in the BBL, and as part of that, I go through every single made field goal and every single block shot that happens in the BBL every single week to then pick out the best plays. And one of the things that really I had not noticed or seen before, because obviously we haven't seen you in enough games because you've always been abroad and I don't watch games in the ACB or wherever, was just how good of a passer you are. And I think that, well, for me, it was very much an underrated part of your game. And then seeing in the BBL, to do a highlight reel of your assists last season would be I would think it would be pretty impressive. Where did that come from? Would you think that was a direct product of skill development stuff in Spain, or do you think that that's, maybe just a natural talent that you have?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a natural talent. I also think my improvement in that aspect comes with, obviously playing with a lot of great passers, but also the older you get, almost, and your basketball IQ increases. And it was almost, at Manchester last year, it was almost a case of, at the beginning of the season, at practice, just throwing the ball against people's heads. Because, in the UK, it's kind of like, as I said, when I talk briefly about the style of play, you'll run a play, but everyone knows at some point someone's just going to go one-on-one. So, I'll make this cut, but I won't really look at the ball and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, I'm throwing these passes and guys are kind of catching it and surprised how open they are. And they've got a wide open layup, and it was kind of funny to me at points, and I did quite enjoy throwing those passes against people's heads. But yeah, it is. I've always, I enjoy making a good pass. And I think Lloyd will say this sometimes as well. That I sometimes get a bit overexcited about passes and try and make an absolutely ridiculous difficult one. But, I get a lot more excited by making one of those passes and seeing someone else score than I do, by, I've never done it, but breaking someone's ankles or crossing someone over or whatnot. Do you know what I mean? The level of fulfillment and stuff like that, and what it gives back to me as a player is a lot more fulfilling than anything else, really.
So I'm conscious of time here, so let's kind of start wrapping up with some wrap-up questions from your career. So it's been 20 years since you went to Spain. You're 34 now, right? So you went when you were 14. When you look back over the last sort of 2 decades, I guess what are the biggest highlight standout moments? I'm assuming probably the Olympics are going to be up there, but along with that one, but what are the other sort of peak moments that you would point to as standout moments?
Yeah, it's definitely got to be pro debut. But one that's always stood out to me as well personally is the GB senior men's debut, which was a big one and one that I'll always remember. Yeah, it's a tough one. I've been lucky enough to be part of of a lot of really good teams. Been part of a lot of really good moments. But as I said at the beginning of the show, the thing that I will most miss is the day-to-day stuff, the day-to-day being a basketball player. You know, just thinking about it now, I can just got stories popping up in my head about, you know, just not even playing experiences, but, you know, just trips and the time on the practice court and you know, going to the gym at 12 o'clock at night to get some shots up with your teammate, and just what many people would consider silly stuff or stupid stuff, but it's stuff that made the whole journey worth it. So yeah, I mean, you can always, as you said, you can say Olympic Games. You know, I think of the Olympic Games as, yeah, it was great, but it also had like a negative side to it and stuff like that. But you know, it's just that this day to day, you know, the long summers with GB, you know, stuff like that. It's just, yeah, I mean, it's stuff that, you know, everyone's got their own view on things. Everyone's got their own, but that's the one thing I would highlight, you know, of my career, of, you know, what's made it special, I think.
What about your best individual performance?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I've never been a elite level scorer. I've been able to, I can put the ball in the basket without a shadow of a doubt, but you know, I mean, I think what I consider being an elite level scorer and what other people may consider being an elite level scorer is different. But you know, there's been a number of games where I've, you know, come close to maybe triple doubles and you know, but maybe with 12, 13 points. You know, not putting up like, you know, I have had 30-point games and won games for my teams in that sense. But it's hard to finger point that. You know, I mean, people here in Spain still stop me on the street. Because I live in Madrid, obviously, where Estudiantes have come from, and now cross-time rivals against Real Madrid. And I remember in 2008 or 9, like I hit a game-winning 3 on the buzzer in overtime to beat them. And people still to this day stop you on the street and say that was like the best 3 minutes of my life, kind of thing to me. You know, which is, you know, it impacts you. You know, like the fact that someone is that supportive or that sold that this team is the best thing in the world, and that you've, you know, helped them have the happiest 3 minutes of their life, to me is pretty special, kind of thing. So yeah, it's just moments like that, you know, kind of stick with you more than individual performances. But as I said, you know, you can probably go through, I'm not sure who's got all the stats now, but like Jamie Smith or someone like that who's got all these collection of stats, and you can probably pick out 2 or 3 games that statistically stick out. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to finger point, you know, a game like that.
What about the best coach you've ever played for?
Oh, that is a good one. I had a feeling you might ask me something like this. I mean, luckily enough, I've played for some really good coaches. Obviously, the ones that stand out now in terms of in the British public eye, like Chris Finch and Nick Nurse and people like that. And I would say that Finch is probably, technically and tactically, probably one of the best coaches I've ever had. He was a mastermind, I would say, technically and tactically. But yeah, I mean, I've had all types of coaches. I've had crazy ones, I've had nice ones, I've had, you know, absolute lunatics. You know, I've been hit on the shoulder with a stick because my defensive stance wasn't low enough. You know, I've got countless stories. I've had a lot of coaches, to be fair. But yeah, I mean, from all different nationalities and all different walks of life, ex-players, old men, coaches just get a seat out and put it at half court and shout instructions from there because they can no longer stand up for too long. Yeah, I mean, I've had all types, so it's hard to... But yeah, I mean, from a technical, tactical point of view, I think Finch is up there. Obviously worked with Scariolo, who's just won EuroBasket with Spain, and he was another... I mean, I'm convinced now, but after all these years, that to be a coach at that level, you have to be nuts. You know, you have to be a bit round the bend in one way or another. Scariolo was that. He was extremely precise in everything he wanted and the way he wanted it. And the same with some of this, this great. I played for like a great ex-Croatian player, Velimir Parasovic, and he was the same. You know, you didn't have 30 seconds to breathe at practice. You know, it was full on, intense. But then I played for coaches who have forbidden me from going to the gym more than once a day. You know, you just get everything. You know, and they're all the same. They're all equally as crazy as the next one. But that's what makes them great.
Was it a surprise to you that Spain won EuroBasket? Going into EuroBasket, obviously they were not very much far from favourites, but they've done it again, and their summer across all age groups this year has been ridiculous. Boys and girls, 16s, 18s, 20s, and then obviously seniors, they've medalled at everything they've played in. Was it a surprise for you that they won it in the end, or is it just like, well, they're Spain, that's what they do?
I mean, it was a surprise because if you look at EuroBasket this year was probably the strongest EuroBasket ever in terms of talent level and obviously the amount of hype it got before the tournament because of the people that were involved. But again, I think like a couple of superstars or people have talked about it at EuroBasket in terms of like people like Janice and stuff saying that European basketball is tough. It is. And the thing that makes it so tough is the teams. It's not like in the NBA where you have individual talent that pops out and just can win you a game. In Europe, you need a good team to win, And Spain winning this EuroBasket is not a consequence of Spain starting practicing on the 1st of August. Spain winning EuroBasket is the fact that they've had, the Hernan Gomez brothers, they've had everyone on that team, obviously apart from Lorenzo Brown, brought up through their system, and they've played the same way with the same people, with the same philosophy for years upon years upon years, and they just know how to play to each other, how to get the most out of each other, and what's expected of them. They all know their role, they all know what coach wanted of them, and I think that's an extremely valuable and underrated area of the game. And I think something that definitely teams and national teams in the UK can learn from.
Who's your favourite teammate of all time?
Oh, it's tough, that, isn't it?
Getting ready to upset some people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can't say one. I've had lots of great ones. Both with GB. From the early years when like people like Drew Sullivan, Loire kind of looked after me a bit. They were really good teammates. Even going back to people like Andy Betts, he was a really good teammate. And it's not someone I played for a lot of time, but it's someone I've got an extremely fond memory of. In the way he carried himself and the way, how good a teammate he was really. But yeah, I've played with lots of great players, but also great people. So I think to be a great teammate, you've got to be a great person. And I've played with a lot of those, so it's really hard to put my finger on. Even in this past EuroBasket with some of the guys on the team, there were some outstanding people and teammates on that team. And to be a great teammate from my point of view, you don't have to be my best friend and that. And although a lot of my very close friends are from basketball and are from playing with them over the years, but the amount of using the GB team this summer, for example, the amount of leadership, the amount of caring, the amount of support that was in that locker room day in and day out was something that I'll always remember for a number of years.
What advice would you give to a young player that wants to have a successful professional career like you, kind of get it done? Like, they're 12, 13 years old. You've seen basketball in Europe. You've seen basketball in the UK now, having done a season here. You're seeing where British players might be a bit behind or whatever. Like, what advice would you give to a young person that's aspiring of making it pro?
Definitely ask questions. I do think there is especially there is a community out there that's of players, current players, senior players, ex-players that are willing to help, and I think a lot more approachable than a lot of people may think they are. So yeah, definitely ask questions about, what they think is best or what they would have done in this situation. And then I would just say, fall in love with the game. There's not enough time in the day for you to go and shoot, to go and work on your ball handling, to go and just really fall in love with the aspect of it, and all the other stuff will come. Really, I think. The moment I stopped, even towards the end of my career, stopped worrying and just focused on doing what I knew was best for me, and focusing on the fundamentals of the game. The things that I worked in the back garden with my dad when I was 10 years old. Those are the things I still keep doing today. Everything in basketball is being discovered and practiced, and someone's tried it at least once. So there's nothing new you're going to discover. I think it is really just a case of doing the simple things to the best of your ability, and I think everything else will come after that.
And then finally, what do you want your legacy to be when they talk about, Dan Clark, the player? How do you want to be spoken about? How do you want to be remembered?
Definitely as a good teammate or a great teammate. Someone that has always given his all for the team, whether it's worked or not worked, but has always been 100% sold on what's going to work and what's not going to work, and being part of that solution to problems on the team and things like that. But yeah, I think it's kind of hard for me to really talk about what I think of myself really personally, but but yeah, I mean, those are definitely values that I consider to be important, and that I want people to recognise me for, I think. But outside of that, whether you think I was a good player, a bad player, and not an interesting player, that's just personal opinion, isn't it? And it's it comes with being a professional athlete, and if you like me, great. If you don't, well, also great, So yeah, that's where I'm at with that one, really.
That's a perfect place to leave it. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time today. Obviously, congratulations on an incredible career. I think I'll be the first to say that your dedicated service to GB particularly is hugely inspirational for everyone, and I think everyone can take a leaf out of that book. And I look forward to sort of seeing what's next, following the progression of your career, hopefully seeing you around a little bit more, and seeing you continue to make positive moves for British basketball.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Sam. Likewise, I'll definitely see you around a lot more now.